It's many signifying the U.S. United States happen.
5, 4, 3.
We have stage 2 engine ignition. 1 minute 25 seconds. Change pressure hold. No
Can we have igniters work? And we have ignition. Chamber ready to rise.
291 4229.
Hey guys, City Walk, City Wall here, and welcome back to Mars. This is the first episode that I've recorded since I released episode 1, and I just wanted to thank you all for the overwhelming support. Everyone seems to love this series, so I'm happy to dig in and keep building some stuff. First thing that I built this episode was sort of the entrance to the city. So this is the area where if you arrive on a spaceship, you would go maybe underground from the spaceport outside the dome and through a tunnel underground, and then you would pop up here in the area that I'm about to build. I'm sort of basing the concept of this place off of like a customs or a border crossing type place where anyone who comes through here, would probably have to like show ID or maybe a passport, get their luggage or bags inspected, that kind of stuff. And like a lot of things in the city, there's two versions. There's one for the people who live up above that's just as nice and welcoming and pleasant as could be. And then there's one for the people who live on the lower half of the city that's just like sunken down and in a terrible, terrible part of town with like industrial things all around it, and it's just the absolute opposite of welcoming. So not only is this something that I wanted in the city because it makes sense for the story of it, I also wanted to do this because citizens who are arriving to the city by car, there's an issue where like they drive into the city and drive to a conveyor belt that's like near to their house and pop out of their car at some random place and then walk along the side of the conveyor belt until they get to their house. And I didn't want that. I wanted a place where a citizen could drive off the road before they even get to the city and get out of their car and walk through this entrance. So that kind of solves for me the problem of, at least when citizens are arriving to the city, getting out of their cars and walking on the conveyor belts. So what I did was, there's a tunnel that leads to the edge of the map, and I made a little off ramp and had that come down really steep to the floor of the dome and do a little loop and connect back to the freeway in the other direction. And that segment that's at the floor of the dome, it's not a tunnel, it's one of the roads that has a sidewalk attached to it, so citizens can get out of their car there. And I took a pedestrian path and connected it from that segment to the rest of the networks of pedestrian paths that go throughout the city. So now citizens can get out of their car there and walk along that path to anywhere they want in the city, and it's quicker for them because it's much closer to the edge of the map. They don't have to drive through the whole central sorting exchange area. The next thing that I did was start detailing up this path with some turnstiles and this parking structure roof prop that's pretty cool looking. You'll see I use it over and over this episode. I also found these funny little people props. They're called Linda. It's one lady over and over, and I you can't really tell, but I placed a ton of them here, like trying to get into the thing. I put some guards, like policemen. I found this like medical tent thing that I'm using here sort of as maybe like an x-ray machine that you would have to go through. It's kind of cool. You can even see people walking through this area now before it's detailed. And then I put some really big industrial buildings on either side. I'm figuring this is a pretty industrial area. I used the painter mod there to change the colors of the buildings and place a couple more industrial buildings along the side here. The rest of this path just needed some detail, so I put some little buildings, some corrugated metal fences with like some boxes behind it, some policemen, and I found this pretty cool prop. It's like an offshore windmill holder, and I placed that down and started using it as like a platform for these military men to stand on top of, with like some lights and a glass door leading inside of that industrial building. And I decided that was really cool, so I wanted to do the same thing on the other side, like a similar platform with some railing and some more policemen over there. And I used this awesome asset that Skibbeth showed me when he saw episode 1 of this series. It's like a prop that is called the Future Capsule Apartment. And what's cool about this is not only does it look very futuristic, but it has this light up window. And I thought it could be pretty cool to use this window as sort of the entrance and exits for little conveyor belts for like sort of a luggage pickup drop off area, kind of like an airport, where like a conveyor belt, comes out of one window, does a little loop, goes back into another window. And so what I did to do this was I took the conveyor belt props that I made and scaled them way down with procedural objects, made a little loop, wrapped that loop with a retaining wall, put some concrete in the middle of it, along with some signs that maybe tell you like which conveyor belt has which luggage. I think it turned out pretty well. I didn't 100% finish this area this episode. I'll come back to it eventually when I do the other side, but I think it's pretty cool. This is the kind of place where if you've arrived in the city and you're not destined for the upper parts, maybe up until the point that you've, gotten off the spaceship and are walking through the tunnel, you still think maybe everything's going to be okay. But by the time you get here, your heart kind of sinks. You're looking up at the areas above you and realizing that that's not where you're going to be spending your time. You're going to be down here in the depths of the city. The next thing that I worked on this episode was the upper version of this area. So in terms of the feeling that you got when you walked into this place, it's a polar opposite from the one down below. It's beautiful. There's like snacks and things waiting for you. You feel like you've arrived in paradise here. The first thing that I had to do was create the bridge that connects from the one and only upper area that I've built so far to this place that's kind of on the side of the crater face here at the very edge of the city. So first thing I did here was create a parallel road tool preset with like 4 or 5 different types of networks. I used the surface network grass with the surface network pavement, a skinnier one directly above it. And then on either side, I used some of the Ronix railway decorative network siding pieces. And I've been using those all over. This is like the go-to for the sidings of this whole upper area. So once I placed that down, it was pretty easy to kind of connect up the nodes and segments and make this look like it was all built at once. And then I just started detailing the whole thing up. I placed down more of those parking roof pieces. I turned them into procedural objects so that I could make them much skinnier and have them fit really nicely on this bridge. I put some plants and trees on either side of the path and some lights as well on each of these kind of posts of the parking cover. And then I was sort of having an issue when you're looking from underneath at this. The network surfaces and ploppable surfaces as well are see-through from the bottom. And this is actually one of the main reasons that I made that concrete support piece last episode, because not only that, but the tunnel block assets are also see-through from the bottom, so I needed something that wasn't. And in this case, I used pedestrian decking by Takachi 269, and I turned it into procedural objects and just spent way too long to make something that did not end up looking all that amazing, but it was just a lot of like messing around with the little vertices. And then I also used procedural objects again on these posts to create these kind of 3 curved pillars that are supporting this bridge from one central point underneath. So then it was just about building the actual customs area on the side of this crater face. I used those same concrete support pieces as sort of the base of it. I used some more of those railway siding pieces to make the edges, some ploppable pavement and grass to cover up the concrete here. And between the pavement and grass is this fence that I am using. It's the Avanya black iron fence, non-conforming, and I'm using it because it's non-conforming, so you can copy all the nodes and segments and raise them way up into the air as opposed to having them just like stick to the terrain. And I'm using that fence and the railway siding pieces not only because they're non-conforming, but also because they're network, so it's much easier to make curves with them, which is sort of the style of this upper area, and it would be almost impossible with props. So then I actually had to make this functional, so I took a pedestrian path, a tunnel version, and had it connect to that same segment of road that comes off of the main highway. It goes up the hill and pops out at this customs area, which then connects to all the pathways for this whole upper area. Last thing I did was just put some glass sort of like custom booths where maybe there's like some sort of officer or border agent type person who sits here and maybe checks your papers when you arrive, but doesn't do much invasive searching like down below. There's some snack things right when you get in, some flowers and plants and trees, and some lights for when it's nighttime. So obviously not everyone who arrives here in the upper part of the city might want to walk, and so what I wanted to do was create a transportation hub for this upper part of the city. So that means helicopters and helipads. I've been using a bunch of these gray flame rocks, which are, can't say it enough, the most amazing thing that's ever come out on the workshop. And I've been using them a bunch on the side of this crater to kind of morph the terrain more easily, you know, just make it exactly how you want it. And I made sort of like a cascading thing where there was a couple different levels of rocks at different heights and put different helipads at different heights, kind of 3 of them arranged in a nice way up the side of this mountain, and started connecting them up with some pedestrian walkways, like stairs basically. I started at the bottom and just started placing stairs and then rearranging the heights to kind of match the stairs and rearranging the placement of the helipads as I was going. And by the time I got to the top, I had to connect it up to this customs area that I'd already kind of closed off, and so I had to delete a couple nodes and segments and rearrange a few things and rebuild just kind of like that one little part of the upper area so that it connected to the stairs. The only other thing I did here was put some red lights on this really big tall pole for when it was nighttime to light up each of these helipads individually, but that's just in terms of playing in the game. There was really a lot that went into this outside of the game in Blender and Photoshop and the asset editor. And that's because when I was looking on the workshop for helicopters to use in the city, there aren't very many futuristic ones. There aren't very many helicopters at all even, and if you look at what's on the workshop, the ones that are there, 95% of them are actually reskins of vanilla helicopters. And that's because, as I found out after doing this, it's incredibly complicated to make a helicopter from scratch for this game. I probably shouldn't go into the ins and outs of why that is, because it gets kind of technical, but just it's the rotors. It's all the rotors' fault. But in the process of doing this, I actually did end up making a very comprehensive kind of guide if you're interested in making a helicopter from scratch for this game. I have the helicopter, it's released on the workshop now, and in the description of that, the guide is there. But the other part of this that just had me pulling the hair out of my head was after I finished the helicopter, I thought everything was going to be fine and dandy. Sunset Harbor is out, the passenger helicopters are in the game now. When the DLC did come out, I commented on Ninja Noob Slayer's 1x1 invisible spawners, and he very, very, very kindly made an invisible helicopter stop. But when he did so, he was like, you know, the AI of this is a little buggy, and I didn't test it out for a couple days until after that, and turns out, oh my god, yeah, it's buggy. I'm not even completely sure what's happening here, but basically, I want these stops to be raised up in the air so I can place them on top of buildings and things. And there's literally no way to do that, no matter what you do. Like, these helicopters refuse. They will fly underneath the terrain in order to get to where they think the stop should be. Not only that, but the nodes and segments that make up like the paths that the helicopters fly on are really buggy. They don't like connecting to each other. Move It tool at the time when I was making it, I don't know. Now maybe it's fixed, but Move It can't select those nodes and segments, so you're stuck with them the second you place them down. So I ended up having to completely abandon the Sunset Harbor DLC helicopters, and what I did instead was I went back to my original plan and made a blimp that looks like a helicopter. So that's what you're seeing flying around now is actually a blimp which, is kind of sad considering how excited I was for the Sunset Harbor DLC and for this feature. But it turns out that blimps and the passenger helicopters are almost identical in the way that they work, so it doesn't really matter. You can import a helicopter model as either one. So it all ended up working out in the end, even though, man, did I lose some hairs on the top of my head over this one. So since I did end up making both versions, the pack that is released on the workshop that is this asset actually does contain a blimp version, a Sunset Harbor helicopter version, and it also contains a really awesome invisible blimp stop that, well, it's not 100% invisible. It has this one little thing sticking up, but Vinicus M on the workshop made it, and I just basically took all the props that came with it off, so it's just this one little thing that sticks up that it's pretty easy to hide, and it works really, really well as a blimp stop. So that's what that pack contains. It's pretty sad about the Sunset Harbor helicopters, but in the end, everything worked out. I now have helicopters carrying citizens around the city, which is awesome. Before this series started, like a couple months before, I was talking to Lord Grooney, who is an awesome asset maker on the Steam Workshop. He makes a lot of French assets. If you've ever used the Bordeaux tram, he made that. And he was the one who convinced me to start making assets in the first place. And the very, very first one that I made was this blender looking thing. And I was being made fun of because I was making a blender in Blender. People were looking over my shoulder as I was doing it. But what it really is an algae oxygen generator. And for a while I didn't think I was going to use this in the city at all, but I changed around the textures a little bit recently and was trying to figure out a good way to put it in. And so what I decided to do here is in this area that's underneath this bridge that I created to put kind of like the first of maybe a few different places around the city that are sort of like oxygen generators. And it's a pretty industrial place, all things considered. People don't live here, obviously. But I started off by placing them kind of like cascading up the side of the crater, and I decided that didn't really look very good, and I wanted them kind of buried further down. And so I just put a couple of them, just 5 of them, in a straight line along the road. I started connecting them up along with these like kind of just tanks with the industrial pipeline asset that's a nodes and segments kind of asset, and placed some giant Dole nuclear power plant fans along the back in a big long row. So I'm thinking that these algae oxygen tank generator things are connected by pipe to these fans, and the fans pump, that air into the dome. And those assets that I made, they're technically a sewage treatment asset with like an animated prop in the middle, because to be honest I couldn't figure out how to do animated buildings, and I did already know how to do animated props. And so it's sewage. I don't know exactly why. I mean, maybe that's realistic to have an algae generator. The algae needs to eat something and you give it sewage. It sounds pretty disgusting, but maybe that's a thing that could happen. Otherwise, let's just ignore the fact that it's dealing with sewage, I guess. And then just put a couple other buildings on the side of it. I put this really crazy looking fence. It's called the Combine fence around the edge. I spent quite a while making this like upper metal walkway for workers to walk around like up above this whole like pipe and conveyor belt and tank area. I used that same Avanya non-conforming fence again to go around the edge, which was maybe not quite as appropriate looking this time, but I think it did the job all right. And put some little worker props sort of, randomly placed around on this decking. And I think we saved the best for last this episode. because the last thing I did was I made an insane looking favela type area directly across from these algae tanks. And I said it last episode, and I really mean it. I think this is the coolest thing so far in the city, personally. Basically, what I did was I mentioned it that the buildings here were sort of temporary, so I deleted them and started on the left side here, just placing a bunch of these buildings that I knew stacked very well because I had done pretty much the exact same thing in Kobayashi Island. So that area was pretty cool. I just detailed up the balconies a little bit with some props and awnings and things here and there. And then for the actual favela area, basically I used a ton of these shantytown assets that I've mentioned before that are the wonderful creation of Creepy Eyes on the workshop, and I just started stacking them. Basically, I just put down big ones towards the bottom and then just started placing more and more down, raising them up higher and higher until I got all the way up to the base of the upper area. I thought I would have an issue with the buildings that were this high up being able to connect to the road, but actually there's the upper area road that goes directly behind them, and I guess that's close enough to make things work. And then so I just started detailing it. I put a ton of trash props like on all these little tiny roofs all throughout it, and I was thinking for a second about putting a lot of electrical wires running all over this thing, but I decided against it. It looked a little messy, I think. And then just the last thing was I put some tents and kind of made sort of like maybe a homeless camp at the base of it, like directly outside of the algae tanks. The one problem I was having with this whole little area here was these algae tanks actually are kind of polluting, and so it made basically everyone in the favela sick, and there was just like an endless stream of medical helicopters coming to pick up sick people here. And so I ended up caving. I didn't originally want to get this mod, but I did. I got the Customize It mod, which, if you're unfamiliar, allows you to click on any service building and change some of the values. So in this case, I changed the pollution range and the pollution amount to be lower, and since I had it, I also did that for the cable car stops as well. So those were also kind of causing some sick people around them, and that helped with that as well. I think the green light that's kind of like glowing from this whole industrial area here, and all the different like paths and pipes and things crisscrossing throughout it, as well as this sort of bridge going over the top of it that's like very nice up above, and obviously this favela type area especially kind of, I think, gives this area an extremely unique personality, which is sort of, you know, what I'm going for in each and every little nook and cranny of this city. Speaking of which, if you have any ideas for things that might be cool in the city, definitely let me know in the comments. And if you ever want to play around in the city, I release my save games on Patreon, so you can head over there. The link is in the description. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I'm really happy to see that you guys are enjoying the series so far. That's it for me, City Walk, City Wall, and I'll see you guys next time on Mars.